Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at De Bello Gallico from Julius Caesar. So this is his famous work on the Gallic Wars. So specifically we're going to look at book 1, chapter 1, so the very beginning, which is often called the Helvetian Campaign. That's what it really focuses on. So before we dive in, I'd encourage you to make sure you understand the culture, the history, the background of the Gallic Wars so you can understand what Caesar's talking about here. So if you've never looked into him, the Gallic Wars are between 58 and 50 BCE. And what you're really looking at is the Romans and their conquest of what we might call today modern day France, right? That's the area that they're calling Gaul. And so if you look at this picture here, these two maps, on the left, you're seeing basically what the Roman Republic controlled in yellow in 58 BCE when Julius Caesar kind of shows up in northern Italy and takes control of these provinces. And over to the right, you're seeing what it looked like after 50 BCE. So when he's done with these wars, and you can see that the region that they're conquering is basically modern day France with parts of, I guess, Switzerland would be in there, Germany probably, and just that sort of region of Europe. This is what it's all about. And this war, these wars, you might say, have a major impact on Roman history, right? Because it shows or it kind of leads to the power increasing of Julius Caesar. And we know he goes on to do all sorts of other things after this. But it also has a big impact on the modern world, right? So what he did here and kind of the wars spreading Roman culture through this region, right? It has a big impact and a long ripple through European history, right? And so what we want to do here is you want to think about what's going on, what is the history behind this? What's Caesar telling us? And the thing we want to focus on in this video, when I'd encourage you when you read the Gallic Wars, is you have to understand it's written by Julius Caesar. So there's sort of an inherent problem where you can't quite treat it as history because it's being written by the person who is the subject, right? So it's sort of like an autobiography in that sense. And you have to imagine that if Caesar's writing it, he's not going to tell you the entire truth. Why would you, right? He's going to, fudge the details and try to persuade you. So in a lot of ways, this is a propaganda piece. And so if you look at what he's saying and we compare it to other sources of what we know happened, you can get an interesting picture. Caesar's not going to tell you exactly what happened. He's going to highlight himself. And so you're going to see as we go, there's a bunch of different passages where, things look horrible and the Romans are about to get killed. And then Caesar shows up and everything turns out great, right? That's the thing you have to keep in mind. You are being sort of actively persuaded throughout this entire piece. So you have to have that mindset and understand what this is, right? What De Bello Gallico is, because it's not straight up history, right? It's not intended to be that. Caesar is writing for an audience back in Rome who probably doesn't know much about Gaul. They've heard of this region, the people, right? They've had different wars with them, but they're not going to be able to tell, to the level of detail that Caesar did of what's going on, particularly, the lower class people. And so that's the group that Caesar's trying to persuade, because we're going to see a lot of what he's doing is not exactly legal, right? And so he's trying to persuade people of how great he is. And it's all basically one big sort of propaganda or persuasion piece. So before we dive in too far, I'd encourage you, like I said, look this up on your own. One resource I really like in my classroom is the Kings and Generals YouTube channel. I think they do a great job of taking all history, but particularly Roman history, and putting it with some awesome visuals and great narratives to try to just let you understand what's going on in a really succinct way. So this is what I use. And again, I don't know the people running Kings and Generals. I'm just a big fan. So I'll promote them whenever I can, but this is what I'm always showing my students. So they have a series called Caesar and Gaul. You can either watch, I believe you can watch the different pieces as individual videos. They're about, call it 15, maybe 20 minutes a pop. Or you can watch this video, which is the entire thing. I think it's over 2 hours long. But there's a couple different ways to understand it and kind of digest it. But I'd encourage you to start there. That's a really good place to start. World History Encyclopedia has some great articles if you'd rather read it. But either way, just try to dive in and really immerse yourself so you can understand what's going on. And then when you read De Bello Gallico, it'll make a lot more sense. So like I said, the first part of De Bello Gallico, right, the first chapter is about the Helvetian Campaign. So here's a map. This is just from Wikipedia, but it gets thrown around a lot in commentaries. It's showing a map of this section of Europe, right? Really France, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, right? And it's showing it labeled with the regions that Caesar is about to tell you about and the tribes he's talking about, okay? So the area we're really focused on, I've highlighted here in red. You can see that right in the middle there, it says Helveti. This is the group of people living in modern-day Switzerland. They're in sort of like a gap between the Alps. And this group of people are going to be sort of the flashpoint of setting off the entire war. And so if you read the background, I know this is a lot, but you're going to see that Caesar is looking to start a war in a lot of ways. He's looking for a reason to go in here and conquer, and you can dive into the background as you go. But the Helveti give him that opportunity. And so there's two ways to understand it. You're going to see Caesar is going to tell you this is an invading army, right? A horde coming to invade Italy and take out the Romans and their allies. Some other sources, right, kind of paint a different picture, and you can interpret it a different way and say this is a migrating group of people. And that's the whole point of this first book, is how do you interpret the migration of the Helveti? Are they refugees? Are they an invading army? Like, that's the persuasion part. But I want you to focus in on this part of the world, and this map right there in the red. That's what you need to understand. And if you're looking at the map, just quickly, in the bottom, you can see it says Cisalpine Gaul, right? Gallia Cisalpina. That's the northern part of Italy, right? The Romans control that on this side of the Alps. Over to the left of that, the west, you have it's labeled Narbonensis, right? This is the province that Caesar's talking about, Provincia. This area of modern day France, southern France, is Roman controlled. This is one of their provinces, right? One of the early ones. So you can see that the situation is kind of interesting. You have the Romans kind of in the south. Then you have Germans up in the northeast. You have the Gauls, sometimes called the Celts, right, on this map. And they're all kind of mixed together. And so you're going to see how the politics, the boundaries, it all ties into this first chapter. Okay, or this first book, I should say. So that's a long background, but hopefully you take a minute. If you haven't looked it up, pause the video, go look it up first. It just makes it easier to read this. But now we're going to dive in. You're going to see how Caesar describes it. And I want you to pay attention again to the language, the style, and what he's telling you, because again, you are being persuaded of something. So this is how it starts. And this is honestly one of those phrases that anyone who took Latin, back in the day in high school can probably quote this. They have it memorized, and this is something where, like parents on back to school night will always say this to me. It's one of his most famous lines. But he starts by saying, Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, quarum unam incolum Belgae, aliam Aquitani, tertiam qui ipsorum linguae Celtae nostra Galli appellantur. Okay, so it starts with Gaul, or all Gaul, omnis Gallia, right? All Gaul is divided in three parts, partes tres. So if you think of that map, he's showing you that there are three sections of Gaul. And he's going to walk you through them here. You have of which, there's your genitive, right? So of which, unum, meaning one part, that's your direct object. The subject is Belgae. So the Belgians, incolum, they inhabit unum, and the missing word here is partem, and we'll explain what he's doing here. Unam partem, one part. Aliam, meaning another part. Aquitani, so the Aquitani, you have to imply the word incolum, they inhabit. Aliam, meaning aliam partem, another part. So part one, the Belgians inhabit. Another part, the Aquitani inhabit. And then you have tertiam, which means third. And again, it's really tertiam partem. So you're saying a third part, meaning a group of people inhabit, and it's qui, so who, lingua ipsorum, in the language of themselves, or in their own language, you might say, the Celts, right? And the verb you're pulling here is appellantur, they are called Celts. So it's saying this group of people who in their own language, lingua ipsorum, are called Celts, they incolunt, or they inhabit the tertiam partem. But then there's a side note, nostra, meaning in ours, and again, the missing word here is lingua, so he's really saying in our language, appellantur, they are called Galli, Gauls. So if you put this all together, you're saying all Gaul is divided into three parts, of which the Belgians inhabit one part, the Aquitani inhabit another part, and the third part, right, the tertium, is inhabited by, you can think of, it's those who, qui, that's kind of your subject there, who in their own language are called Celts, in our language are called Gauls. So this group of people, the Gauls, inhabit the third part. And if you go back to that map, you're going to see that Aquitania, right, is in the southwest corner of Gaul. The Belgians, right, the Belgae are in the northeast corner, and right in the middle are the Gauls, right? Celtica is what you have on the map, the Celts, okay? So Caesar's kind of leading you on this geography lesson in the first part. Then he keeps going. And you have he omnes lingua institutis legibus inter se different. So all these, right? All these people, they say different. They differ inter se, I should say. So they differ among themselves or between themselves. Then you have three ablatives. They're all ablative of respect. So you can almost think of it as like with respect to, right? All three are showing you that. So it's saying they differ between themselves or among themselves in respect to lingua, language, institutis, right? Institutions, or customs, you might say, and legibus, laws. So he's showing you here that their cultures are all different, right? That's the point of this line. Then you have Gallos, ab Aquitanis, Garumna flumen, ab Belgis matrona et sequana divide. Okay, so you have Garumna flumen, right? The Garumna River, right? The flumen, divide, it divides the Gallos, the Gauls, ab Aquitanis, the Gauls from the Aquitani. So he's talking about a river in southeast, I guess it would be southwest rather, southwest France, modern day France. And he's saying this is one border. So if you look at that map, you can see one border is the Garumna River. Then he's saying the Matrona at Sequana, right? These two rivers, there's the Matrona River and the Sequana, right? He's saying these form a single boundary, which is why you have this sort of pluralization happening here. But both of them together, they divide. And again, notice how divide is third person singular. You technically have two different rivers. It feels like it should be plural, but Caesar's kind of grouping these together like these two rivers forming one thing, one boundary. So he's saying the Matrona and the Sequana divide it. And again, you have to supply Gallos, right? The Gauls, Belgis from the Belgians. So he's laying out the map here and saying that the Gauls in the middle, they have a southern border with the Aquitani, which is a river, the Garumna River, and they have sort of this northeastern border with the Belgians, which is the Matrona and the Sequana rivers, right? And these two together kind of form this boundary. So if you're looking for modern day equivalents, the Matrona, I believe, is the Marne River, if I remember right, and I think the Sequana is the modern day Seine. So if you want to look these up, again, you can see it. There's a bunch of maps showing you what it looked like in Caesar's time, or use a modern map, and either way, you'll get to the right place. Then he continues. You have horum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae, propteria quod a cultu atque humanitate provinciae longissime absunt, minimeque ad eos mercatores saepe comeat, atque ea quae ad effeminandos animos pertinent important. Okay, so a long line here. And he's saying of all of these, so horum omnium is genitive plural. So of these, right, or of all of these, the bravest, the fortissimi, there's your superlative, the bravest are the Belgians, right? And he's telling you why. So here you have propteria quod, which is basically like a duplication, right, of redundancy, you might say. It literally says on account of because. You can just translate this as because, right? Caesar does this a lot, but think of it as one thing. So he's saying they are the bravest because, right, absunt, they are longissime absunt, they are very far away from what? A cultu, from the culture, and the humanitate, the humanity, you might say, of the province, provinciae. Now here, when he capitalizes this, and we're adding the punctuation, but when he refers to provinciae, the province, that's southern France, right? It's called Provence today for that reason. That's the Roman province he's talking about. So he's saying the Belgians are the fiercest because they are the farthest away from the Roman province in southern France. And he's going to explain what he means by that. So he's saying, and the mercatores, the merchants, they travel ad eos, to them, meaning to the Belgians. They often travel. They're minime, the least, right? Least often, you might say. So he's saying that they don't ever really go to these people, right? To them, meaning to the Belgians. So merchants don't ever go there. And, right, they don't, meaning the merchants don't important, bring in, think like import, right? Not important in English, but importing something. So, and, atque, they bring in those things which, ea quae, right? So ea is the things, they're bringing in, right? The neuter plural. And then you have quae, those things which. You have sort of the antecedent and the relative clause happening here. And it's those things which pertinent, this is referring to the things now. So it's saying the merchants bring in least of all, right? Least often. Those things which pertain to what? You have ad effeminandos animos. So here what you're looking at is a gerundive. It's odd plus the gerundive. So effeminandos is the verbal adjective, right? That future passive participle, you can think of it. And when you put it with odd, it's usually showing purpose, right? It's a way of expressing purpose. So the way you can translate this is it's the things which pertain to the softening. And again, effeminandos is one of those tricky words. It literally means like feminizing, which sounds a little harsh, right? It is what Caesar's saying here, but you can almost think of it as like the softening or the feminizing, I guess, which sounds kind of wrong to say. Animos, of the mind. So the softening of the mind. What's he getting at here? Caesar is saying that the Roman province is very sort of soft in his mind. He's saying that because they have all this luxury and this culture and all this stuff, the province is actually kind of weakening the men there, is one way to think about it. What's he talking about? He might be talking about Roman baths, wine, good food, all these things like the comforts, the luxury is really what he's getting at here. And he's saying because it's so like luxurious down in the province, and because we trade, right, with the people around us, he's almost saying that the people nearest to the province, specifically the Aquitani, are kind of the softest ones because they're so used to like a good lifestyle and, you know, kind of having it easy. The opposite end of the spectrum are the Belgians, who are so far away that they don't have merchants coming. So he's saying they live a really hard lifestyle, and because of that, they're kind of tough, is what he's getting at. Okay. Then he continues. You have proximique sunt Germanis, qui trans Rhenum incollunt, quibuscum continenter bellum geron. So he says, and they are, meaning the Belgians here, they are proximi, they are close to. So remember, proximi is one of these adjectives that takes a dative, right? So when you have this special adjective near, you need to be near to someone. So he's saying they are nearby or close to the Germans. Important group of people, keep track of this, right? The Germans are sort of the boogeymen in Caesar's narrative, right? They're supposed to be extremely good fighters, scary. He's referencing them here for the first time. So he says they are near to the Germans who, meaning the Germans, who live trans Rhenum, across the Rhine. The Rhine is the border between the Belgians and the Germans, right? And with whom, quibuscum, with whom they gerunt bellum, meaning the Belgians wage war, bellum gerunt, continenter, constantly. So he's saying they are constantly fighting with the Germans, which makes them like tough, right? Toughens them up. So if we come back to our map again, now you're getting a sense of what he's talking about. So the Aquitani, again, are in that southwest corner, the bottom left. He's saying they're kind of soft because they live near us and we've given them our culture and they're not really that tough. The Belgians are in the middle, right? And then he's saying in that northeast corner, you have the Gauls are in the middle, I should say. In the northeast, you have the Belgians, right? So physically, right, geographically, he's saying they are the furthest from us, so they are the toughest. And not only that, they're fighting the Germans who are over to the east. So the constant warfare, the constant fighting, the lack of luxury is what Caesar is pointing to and saying that's what makes the Belgians so tough. So now we're going to keep going again, see where the Helveti come in. And you have quadicausa, Helveti, quoque reliquos Gallos virtute praecedon, quod ferre quotidianis proeliis cum Germanis contendunt, cum aut suis finibus eos prohibent, aut ipsi in eorum finibus bellum gera. So quadicausa, for this reason, right? For this reason, the Helvetii also, right, praecedon, they surpass, you could see, like you go beyond, they surpass, good way to say it. So they surpass the reliquos Gallos, the other Gauls, virtute, in respect to virtue, right? So he's saying for this reason, meaning the fighting with the Germans is really what he's referencing here, the Helvetii are better than all the Gauls. So in the group called the Gauls, he's singling out the Helvetii and saying they are the best fighters. They surpass everyone else in terms of virtue. Right, which means like manliness, toughness, fighting. Quod, right, because quotidianis means like daily. So in nearly, and again, it's ablative. So quotidianis proeliis means in daily battles. And then you have ferre, which means nearly. So in nearly daily battles, cum Germanis, with the Germans, again, the boogeymen over the east, contendunt, they struggle. So he's saying they're almost having daily fights with the Germans. It's toughening them up. Right, then you have a cum clause. So when, right, either they prohibit, prohibent means the Helveti prohibit the eos, meaning the Gauls, from suis finibus, from their own borders. So the reflexive suis is telling you this is talking about the Helveti keeping them, the Germans, out of their own borders, right? So they're either defending their borders or ipsi, they themselves, meaning the Helveti themselves, bellum gerunt, they wage war in eorum finibus, in the boundaries, or sorry, the borders of them. So eorum is not reflexive, so it's not referring to the Helveti. This means the German borders. So again, it's saying they're having these daily fights, and it's either, when either they're keeping the Germans out, prohibet eos, from their own borders, meaning from the Helveti's borders, or they themselves are waging war in their, meaning the Germans' borders, German lands. So he's trying to get at this idea of, that the Helveti are tough because they're constantly fighting the Germans, right? They're constantly either defending their own land or having to go into German territory, and this constant fighting has toughened up the Helveti. And again, you want to think about why. Why is Caesar telling us all this? And what's with the geography lesson? And why does he keep mentioning the Germans and fighting? It's going to become clear in a little bit. Then you have eorum una pars quam Gallos obtinere dictum est, initium capet a flumine Rodano continetur, garumna flumine oceano finibus Belgarum attingit, etiam obsequanis et Helvetiis flumen renum verget ad septentriones. So he says one part, right, of these, one part, and again, he's talking about sort of the borders, I guess, right? One part, which it is said, dictum est, which you might even say, like, it is said that, it's an indirect statement here, that the Gauls hold, right, obtain. It takes its beginning, initium capit. So this border takes its beginning from a flumine Rodano, from the Rhone River, right? The Rhodanus River, that's one border, right? Then you have continetur, it is contained, right, passive verb, by, right, you have your ablative there with the passive, by the Garumna River, and by the ocean, and by the borders, the finibus Belgarum, the borders of the Belgians. So he's talking about where the Gauls kind of are, right? He's explaining, the borders of the Gauls' territory, and he's laying it out for you. You have the Rhone River, the Garumna River, the ocean is up in the north, the Belgians, and this lays out where the Gauls kind of live. Right? Then you have attingit, etiam. It also borders, you might say, the Rhenum flumen, right? The Rhine River, and that kind of borders or separates obsequanis et Helvetis from the Sequani, right, which is a group of people, and the Helvetis, right? So this is the border between them, is really what's going on, right? So it borders or it touches, the Sequani and the Helveti. And then it says at the end, verget, it turns ad septentriones, to the north. So the septentriones part here is talking about like the 7 stars, literally. And it's talking about the direction, right, going north. So these 7 stars are the Big Dipper, right, you might say, right? So if you look at the Big Dipper, I think, isn't one of the stars in the Big Dipper Polaris, the North Star? That's what he's referring to there, and that's why septentriones means north in Latin, right? He's just giving you another geography lesson. But again, he's trying to show you that the Rhine River is sort of that border from the, the Sequani and the Helveti. That's where we're going to be focusing as he moves forward, because the Helveti are going to be really the focus of this, of this chapter, right? And what they're about to do, their migration, is what sets up chapter 1 of book 1. Then he continues, and we have Belgae ab extremis Galliae finibus oriuntor, pertinent ad inferiorum partem fluminis Rheni, spectant in septentrionem et orientem solem. So now he's talking about the Belgians. So he says the Belgians, or you might even think of it as like the territory of the Belgians, oriuntor, they arise from the extremis finibus, from the furthest borders of Gaul, meaning they're up in the farthest part. And they extend, pertinent, ad inferiorem partem, they extend to the lower part, fluminis Rheni, of the Rhine River. So again, on the map, he's talking about the Rhine and sort of that eastern border. Then he says spectant, they look, in septentrionem, again, means like into the north, or you might even say they look to the north, is one way to think about it. And it really means like they extend to the north is what it's talking about. Caesar's using spectant, but again, it's really talking about how far they go. And again, septentrionem is talking about the Big Dipper, right? The 7 stars. So it says they look to or extend to the north, and the orientem solem, to the rising sun. So he's trying to say the east here, right, in his direction. So he's saying it looks or extends to the north and the east, and that northeast part is really where the Belgian territory is, and that's the sort of metaphor he's using here with the orientem solem. Then you have Aquitania agarumna flumine ad Pyrenaeos, montes et eam partem oceani, quae est ad Hispaniam pertinet. Spectat inter ocassum solis et septentriones. So Aquitaine, or Aquitania, you might say, you have to go all the way to the end. Pertinet, it extends, meaning the sort of land of Aquitania extends. Ad Garumna flumine, from the Garumna River, right? Ad Pyrenaeos montes, to the Pyrenees Mountains. So first of all, the Pyrenees Mountains are the border between modern day Spain and France, and the Garumna River is just north of that. So there's a tiny little chunk relative to the rest of Gaul in that southwestern corner, which is what they call today Aquitaine, right? Or Aquitania, the Romans would call it. So it's saying it extends from the Garumna River to the Pyrenees Mountains, and excuse me, the part of the ocean, or you might even say that part of the ocean, eam partem, it's kind of functioning as more of a demonstrative, right? And that part of the ocean, which is ad Hispaniam, near Spain. So again, what he's referencing is the borders, right? So the ocean is kind of on the northwestern part of Aquitaine. You have a river on the northeast and the eastern part, and then you have the Pyrenees Mountains in the south. So again, he's giving the geography lesson. Then you have spectat, it looks, so you can even again say it extends, inter ocassum solis et septentriones. So it extends or looks between the ocassum solis. This is different than the rising sun. This is the setting sun, right? The setting of the sun, you might say, and the septentriones, and the north. So in other words, he's saying that it looks north and west is really where it extends when you're thinking of these borders. So here again, if we just look over at this map, the geography is very clear. So he laid out the three sections. He told you that in the beginning, and he's showing you or describing where they all are, right? So you can see right in the middle is Gaul, Celtica, it's labeled here, right? That's what they call themselves. Up in that northeast part, you have the Belgians. And again, there's two rivers on the southern border between the Belgian land and the land of the Celts, or the Gauls, right? It's the modern Seine and Marne River, I believe. And he's telling you that the land of the Belgians goes east to the Rhine River, and you can see it. It's forming that border between the Germans and the Belgians. And then he told you about Aquitaine. Aquitania on the bottom, you can see the Pyrenees Mountains makes that southern border. To the east, they have the Romans, right? So they're not really going anywhere there. But the northern boundary, right, when you're talking just Gaul, is the Garumna River. That's what's making that sort of squiggly line in the north. And to the west of them, you have the ocean, right? The Atlantic Ocean. So this is what he's describing when he says, Belgium looks to the rising sun and the septentriones, the north and the east, and Aquitaine or Aquitania looks to the setting sun, which is the west, and the north, right? He's kind of showing how they all relate to each other in terms of Gaul and the different pieces of it. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help. If there was anything you're not sure of in the translation, just let me know. But otherwise, keep reading it. And like I always tell you, the more you read it out loud, read it for what it is. If you get stuck, write down where you're stuck and read it again. That method of read and reread will really help you as you go through. You're trying to hit a point where you can read through this without living in your dictionary or constantly needing grammar reference. And it might take a few times to get there, but you will hit that point. Good luck.